Shabbat Shalom, my friends, and no matter how much you plead, I am not going to comment on the recent fascinating assertion by a member of Congress that Christmas trees are not just for Christmas, but for Hanukkah as well. Hamevin, Yavin, those who understand things will understand the reasons for my silence. Our Sedra is Vayigash.Genesis 44:18 and following. The Joseph saga, along with the entire book of Genesis, are both rapidly moving toward their conclusions. Joseph finally reveals his true identity to his brothers. The power of reconciliation slowly, cautiously begins to manifest itself. Even while at the very same time we can hear a whisper coming out of our own subconscious minds, the stage is now being set for the enslavement of the Israelite people in Egypt. Joseph's plan for Egypt works, and that plan, of course, led to most Egyptians becoming Pharaoh's serfs. For some of the readers of Torah, God has step by step created the circumstances out of which the Israelites as a people can finally emerge during the time that they flee Egyptian slavery. For others of us, the scribal authors of Genesis are now completing their assigned task of shaping the prehistory of the Jewish people so that it would mesh with the actual world within which those scribes lived. Many times over the past years, I have referenced the insights of Aviva Zornberg in grappling with the currents of thought, of human psychology, of the role of God and of humanity in finding meaning and purpose in our lives. Though Zornberg has written books of commentary on all of the Chumash, the 5 books of the Torah, it is universally recognized that her volume of commentary on Genesis, The Beginning of Desire, is a singular masterpiece. For Zornberg, it is important for us to understand that the mature Joseph not only wants a path toward reconciliation with his brothers, but he is committed to finding an approach that would not bring them to shame, to embarrassment. So, for example, why didn't Joseph earlier on seek to communicate with his bereaved father, Jacob? Answer from the commentators, because doing so would destroy his brothers in the eyes of their father Jacob. To prevent his brothers' shame, these teachers viewed, Joseph had kept silent. But now they stand before him. That approach, keeping silent, no longer is possible. As Joseph blurts out, "I am Joseph, is my father really alive?" Our text states that the brothers were dumbfounded, unable to speak. Why? Because now their shameful treatment of Joseph was being laid bare for the entire world to see. Zornberg points out how rabbinic tradition warns against shaming others, how shame, in fact, can precipitate a violent response. Even as that same rabbinic tradition states that having a sense of shame about one's deeds is a good first step toward tshuva. So you got both. Some commentators state that the shame and the shock felt by the brothers were so great that they actually violently threatened Joseph's life. So what does Joseph do? He emphatically embraces the cause of the shame. I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold to Egypt. Joseph's strategy to mitigate the shame is to say, yes, you did that. You acted with bitter indifference toward me, but I am still your brother. And you did what you did not out of some deep-seated animus, but because God was using you to secure a better future for our family. Quote, it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. By saying what he did, Joseph not only eased his brother's shame, but he also provided the brothers with an acceptable narrative that they could then share with Father Jacob, so that Jacob would not strike out against them. Joseph had come to view the arc of his life as fortunate somehow, as an expression of the divine will. He was thrown into a pit so that the shared future of Jacob's family could be assured. But this was not a perfect solution. My friends, few efforts to resolve profound conflicts ever yield a perfect solution. The brothers understood Joseph's position, a theological position that he held, as well as a moral position. They could now look directly into the eyes of the viceroy of Egypt and truly see their brother. They could embrace him. They could trust him. They could feel the burden of guilt and of shame being lifted from off of their shoulders. But toxic guilt and poisonous shame can never fully be cleansed from the human soul. As we learn just a little bit later on, after the death of Jacob, traces of shame and of guilt nurtured uncertainty in the brothers for the rest of their lives. And I suspect that this wasn't a perfect solution for Joseph either. It wasn't possible for Joseph's anger toward his brothers to simply be wiped away by his growing maturity and with his increasing sense of God's role in his life. It wasn't possible for Joseph's pain to be fully assuaged by an embrace of God as the one who controls all of history. Joseph fell apart in the presence of his brothers. Don't miss that. His tortured cries filled all of Pharaoh's palace. It is reasonable to assume that Joseph's cries were not only tears of triumph and of joy and of reconciliation, but they were also the sounds of old wounds being torn open. Joseph had wanted to test his brothers, but now there was no time. Those tests crumbled inconclusively. Joseph had wanted to ease their shame and to make reconciliation possible. But this is the same Joseph who, as an adolescent, was able to see into people's hearts and to understand them even better than they understood themselves. The original Joseph and the brothers knew that. they surely knew that Joseph, in contemporary terms, saw right through them. There was an intuitive way in which the brothers not only heard Joseph's embracing words, but in which they also sensed a darker reality behind them. And by the way, what did Jacob know? Did Jacob ever really believe the brothers' explanation as to how Joseph met their fate? Do you think so? Do you think he really believed that? When Jacob sent Joseph out to monitor his brother's work with the flocks, didn't Jacob bear a huge burden of guilt for not fully comprehending the danger into which he was thrusting his beloved son? After all, this is still Jacob. Jacob knew all about deception, about creating false realities in a place of blindness. Was Jacob therefore blind to what his moving to Egypt would ultimately mean for his family? Was Jacob blind to the ghetto of Goshen, in which his family was now being ordered to live, invited to live, ordered to live? And were the scribes who wrote this magnificent story blind to a world in which the sons of Jacob would ultimately go to war against each other, leading to endless cycles of destruction, of exile, reconciliation, and back again? The scribes already knew what that reconciliation in Egypt would ultimately yield. The seeds of our people's future were planted in the soil of shame and of guilt. That future is still with us. And some of us, naive as we are, would like to believe that that future now can be altered. Finishing up the book of Genesis, a little bit more to go. Shabbat Shalom, and I look forward to seeing you next week.